Welcome, everybody, to International Podcast Day 2017. I am Dave Lee, co founder of the event, and got Steve right over here on my shoulder, also manning it. Nope, there he is. While we wait for our next guest, Kai from Ghana, she's going to be sharing um, some very interesting conversation. The African woman owning our narrative through podcasting. So while we get her on the line, I just wanted to introduce her. Kai is host of the Gray Podcast, and Kai is a digital media consultant with 10 years of working in the Ghanaian media. She has worked as a television producer and an online journalist. She is a writer and an avid podcast listener. She started the Gray Podcast just recently in August 2017, not only to share stories on women development, but to be a part of Africa's steady rise with regards to new media and podcast production. Her favorite things to write about are personal growth, feminism, lifestyle, and African socio-culture. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsors of International Podcast Day 2017. Blueberry is a full-service podcasting company, a turnkey solution that will allow a new or veteran podcaster to get set up and running within 15 minutes. Pay them a visit at blueberry.com. Also, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a cafe with two working podcasting and video casting studios. The grand opening happens September 30th, where they'll be broadcasting live throughout the day. Pay them a visit at studio21podcast.cafe. The Messengers, a podcast documentary, is a journey through the modern world of podcasting, uncovering the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Get the copy of The Messengers in iTunes and on Amazon by visiting themessengersdoc.com. And thank you to Potable. Looking for your next favorite podcast? Potable revolutionizes podcast discovery by providing podcast recommendations tailored to you specifically. Start by going to play.potable.co. That's play.podibele.co. And finally, thanks to our bronze sponsors, the Audacity Podcast, Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. And we will be back in just a moment with our next guest. Hey, everybody, we're back. I'm Dave Lee with International Podcast Day, September 30th. We are getting Kai on the line from Ghana here, getting ready. Really excited that she will be the first Ghanaian podcaster ever on the internationalpodcastday.com stream. September 30th, we are getting Kai on the line from Ghana here, getting ready. Really excited that she will be the first Ghanaian podcaster ever on the internationalpodcastday.com stream. September 30th, we are getting Kai on the line from Ghana here, getting ready. Really. Hey, Kai, can you hear me?
Hi, Dave.
Hey, how are you? Are you having maybe some bandwidth issues or something with your video?
Yes, but I can hear
Hey,
you
Kai, can you
clearly
hear me?
now. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, just
Hi, Dave.
hover over the video and go to the settings gear.
Is it better now? Is it clearer from your end?
It
Can you
is
hear me?
clear, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Any chance you have your video working, or is it maybe just hover over the video and hit the gear icon? It'll be there. You are. How are
Can you see
you?
me now?
Yep.
I'm well. Thank you, Dave. How are you doing?
Good. I'm excellent. I'm excellent. Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take up any more of your time since we're running a little bit behind here. So I already introduced you, and we're really excited to have you on the podcast talking about owning your narrative through podcasting, the African woman, a very good perspective we're really interested in hearing. And thank you. You are the first Ghanaian podcaster ever to be highlighted as a speaker on International Podcast Day.
I'm excited. I was listening to Abel's presentation or session, and I know he said he was the newest on the blog. I think I'm the newest on the blog because, I mean, the Great Podcast is a month old, literally, and I'm so glad I was invited to be a part of this immediately after we came out. And so it's exciting. It's an exciting time for me, the podcast as well. And I'm just looking forward to sharing the little that I have and also listening to other people across the world. So yes, I am excited. And thank you so much for letting me speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you're 3 episodes in or 300 episodes in, there is something that everybody as a podcaster, a podcast listener can learn. So on that note, I will get out of your way. We look forward to hearing from you, and I'll pop on here in a little bit later in the hour to send our goodbye. So I appreciate it. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Okay, so am I good to go?
You're good to go.
Okay. Hello again. My name is Kwakyewaa Owusu-Nyantakyi, and my friends call me KY actually. So Dave, it's actually KY. Kind of started from high school. I don't know, somehow the name just kept getting shorter and shorter for people and eventually became KY. So when I started the podcast, I thought it would be great for everybody else to call me that because it's quicker and it saves time. So the Great Podcast started, like I said, about a month ago. But really, the idea came to me, I think, early last year. It came at a time where I was going through personal struggles myself, and I needed an outlet of some sort. It took a toll on me, it took a toll on my family, and I just needed a place to kind of let all of that go. So I was introduced And when I say I'm a late bloomer, I mean I'm a late bloomer because I had no idea about podcasts. I knew nothing about them. I didn't know there was this whole world of such variant content out there, and there was so much that I could connect to. So a friend introduced me to This American Life, which was my very first podcast, the first one I listened to, and I completely fell in love with it. And it became a part of my daily routine. It became a part of what I would wake up to, listening to new things. And slowly I started to build my collection of podcasts. I came across so many different kinds. And there's just something very intimate about podcasts because it's like you're listening to something that only you know, and you're listening to something that only you can relate to at that time. And gradually I started to build my own collection, and it was such a good addition to my lifestyle at the time because I needed it. I needed it to get through the day and to get through the mental stress that I was going through at the time. And so it was on a regular day listening to a podcast I'd subscribed to. I think it was Death, Sex, and Money. And I was wondering, where could I possibly find content that sounded like me, or content that was relatable? And I had no idea that there were actually podcasts happening. There were people actually producing content very close to me. And so I started to do some research, and I realized in countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Ghana, people had started a podcast that was producing original, authentic content that sounded like every day here, every day in these streets here. And so I became excited, and I felt like, oh, okay, then I'm not alone in thinking that it would be a great time to start a podcast. And so I did. I did do that. And I think at this point, I would want to say that it's such a great time to be on the continent right now because for podcasters, this is a new media. This is something that we didn't know we could explore. And the fact that we are, and the fact that we are engaging in conversations and we are finding ourselves across the continent, in the country, it's just an awesome time. I mean, like I said, in Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, and for this particular session, talking about African women, we're becoming more daring economically. We are trying things that aren't mainstream for us, and things that we actually love to do. And podcasting is one of them. So for us, it's storytelling that's changed and evolved, and to be more selective, to have more control over what we want to hear and what we want to talk about is why podcasting has become so enjoyable. I will say that it's still in its formative years because there are only pockets full of podcasts here and there. You could find maybe 5, 6, 10, 11 in various places that are interesting, relevant, and on tip-top shape in terms of podcasting. And it's just a great time to get into it because, like I said, there aren't many people doing it, and there are stories that are being told that need to be told through podcasting, especially for people who want more control over what they listen to. So the Great Podcast, the intent behind it was basically to tell women's stories. As a woman myself, as having had experiences that I felt needed to be shared for other young women to hear and learn from, I wanted to create that safe space that Ghanaian women could speak comfortably, speak about things that people typically around these parts, things that women typically around these parts don't speak of or keep to themselves. I wanted to create a space where we could bond over wine and share stories about the not so clear-cut trajectory in terms of growing personally, economically, professionally, and all of that. And that's how I picture the Great to be. It would be women coming together and sort of becoming a support group for each other, and kind of learn from other people's stories, learn from other people's experiences, and grow from there. And for me, the bigger picture is to get to the point where the Grey could be in a position to help other women who do not have accesses as some do. And the truth is that in Ghana in 2017, even though Ghana is considered a liberal and democratically structured country where we are free to make certain choices, and both men and women have equal rights in a lot of respects, we still serve a very subservient role. We still have limitations in terms of our sexual reproductive health, gender pay, and everyday prejudices that we deal with that we cannot talk about. And the Grey was supposed to be created so that people can have these conversations about career, children, marriage, sex, health, which is deeply tied to validation that comes from our male counterparts still. There are a lot of women who feel they need permission to do what they want to do, and this is tied to their connection with our male counterparts. And it's quite sad that we are about 75% of the labor force in the country, yet we still cannot get as far as we can. We still cannot do as much as we can in these parts because there are males, there are men, ahead of the game. And so we need to work twice as hard. We need to kind of always fight harder to prove our worth and fight harder to prove that we can do better, we can do more, we're capable of the same things. And so that was what the Grey was created for. That was what the Grey was about. And these are the stories that I wanted to tell. Stories about women, for women, and also to help change the narrative that we're so much more than the single idea a lot of people have about women in Ghana. And like I said, it's been a month, but I've spoken to a number of women, and if you hear the stories, it's just amazing what we deal with every day, and still able to have a wholesome mindset to life every single day. And it's just a joy to learn from that and be inspired by that. Motherhood, career choices, having gender equality, everyday sexism that we deal with, the prejudices we have around certain things that shouldn't be, and how we deal with them. It's such a lesson, and it's therapy for other women who listen in, and to learn from all of that. So I thought to myself, if the podcasting could help me tackle such social cultural issues through these conversations with these fearless women, I certainly know that we'll be inspiring a Ghanaian girl somewhere, a Kenyan girl somewhere, a Rwandan girl somewhere who's listening to this podcast. So I'm going to keep this short, but I wanted to share one of the episodes that we did, one of the stories that we tackled, and how it impacted people and how it got the conversation going. I think it was about our third episode. We spoke to a young mother who had a child with cerebral palsy. And that session was so inspiring in so many ways, because listening to her from the beginning of her pregnancy, finding out that her child was going to have cerebral palsy, having to make a decision with her family whether or not to keep the child, and knowing that this child was going to have to deal with everyday challenges. She, as a mother, would have to deal with everyday challenges, was so inspiring. At the time, cerebral palsy in Ghana presently is the second most common motor disability. And listening to her experience, it's amazing that in Ghana in 2017, a lot of mothers are still blamed for having children with special needs. There's so much superstition around having a child who can't do the things normal children can do. And through her story, I realized that she had met other mothers with the same challenge, and these mothers had been abandoned by their families, had been abandoned by their husbands, because she had bad blood, which I'm paraphrasing, but basically that's what they would say, that she doesn't have the capability of having normal, healthy children. And sometimes these women are left quarantined with their children to deal with it any way they know how. And sometimes these children live in very deplorable situations because the mothers do not have the resources or the finances to, as it were, give them the best health care, or give them the needs that they meet their needs as they should. And sometimes it affects the marriage, it affects the woman's economic freedom in many ways. And so when we did this episode, the response was amazing. A lot of people were touched by her story, and everybody could tell from this episode that, unlike her, who she was fortunate enough to have her family around, to have the support of her husband, to have the support of people, because she was surrounded by people who were not only educated but were open-minded. She continues to have the kind of support she needs to take care of her child who has cerebral palsy in the best way possible. But even with her, she realized how difficult it was to come across, to have access to the quality resources needed for children with special needs, the centers, or the trainers, or the people that are trained to take care of situations like that. She found out that there weren't many people like that here, and the few establishments that exist to actually take care of children with special needs are very few and highly expensive, because the resources, it isn't common around these parts. But she's been able to do that because she had a support system, and friends and family came to her need. And that makes just one of many situations like that. Many other women find themselves dealing with this all alone. And it gets so scary that for some women at birth, they kill their children when they find out that they have Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or one type of motor disease or a disability of some kind. Some women secretly kill their children to save their marriages, to protect themselves from the prejudice of society and how people treat them. And so these are the kind of stories that I want to tell on The Grey. I mean, off the bat, if you listen to something like this and you hear that there are women who have children and they kill them at birth or find ways to get rid of them at birth, I mean, it sounds ghastly, sounds gruesome and heartless, but it's also because society deals with them so harshly for mistakes that isn't their fault, for situations that they didn't plan on, for situations that happened to them. And the treatment and the reaction and the way people look at these women, the way people treat them, they become outcasts outrightly. And it's such a problem, especially those who live in the rural areas, people who live far off from the capital. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know who to speak about problems like these. They do not have internet access to research on the conditions their children have and what they can do about it. And even if they do not have the finances to help get the children the accesses that they need to get better or to be in better living conditions. And so this episode it turned out so much conversation around what government is doing and what the policies are, and whether they are favorable for children with special needs and special needs moms, whether there are centers they can go to, whether there are places whether there's enough sensitization of information in terms of what can be done for kids with special needs. So all these questions were being asked, and it's just amazing through podcasting and social media how far this can get to. And after this, I know there's been a number of seminars and sessions, which has been dialogue between government and mothers who have children with special needs, to kind of find out and kind of create policies around this particular problem. And so in our own small way, the Great Podcast could contribute to something like that. It's just fantastic. And it feels rewarding to know that being barely a month old, we can tell stories like that help people rethink certain things. You hear firsthand the experience of what it's like for a modern day Ghanaian woman who has a child with special needs, and how she maneuvers life, is able to nurture still and keep a healthy lifestyle, the support of family, and it's still hopeful that things can get better as well. So it opened our eyes. It opened it changed a lot of notions we have around children with disabilities. So these are some of the stories that we wanted to tell. The Great Podcast is still in it just rounded up its first season, and we will soon go into our second. And these are the kinds of stories we want to tell. We want to dispel prejudices around women in Ghana. We want to use our platform to let women know that it's a great time to be an African woman. It's a great time to be a woman, right? Because we are unlearning so many narratives that have been wrong, so many single story perception we've had when it comes to women and our possibilities and the things we can do. Another favorite episode of mine was with a young woman who moved from science into fashion against all odds, because she knew off the bat she was interested in visual art. She wanted to go into fashion. She wanted to make clothes, nice clothes for people. But I mean, a lot of us here still believe that mainstream occupations and jobs like being a lawyer, being a doctor, being an engineer is the way to go, and it's the way to make sure that you're financially stable, which in many respects is true. But ultimately, a lot of us find ourselves doing things that we don't love and that we don't enjoy. And so listening to her story, for instance, she talked about how it was extremely difficult for her to remain focused. It was extremely difficult to remain tunnel vision about wanting to do fashion, because her father, her mother, and everybody thought it was a bad idea. And frankly, being a personal friend myself, even at the time when she told me she wanted to go into fashion, I thought it was a bad idea. I was like, I mean, hey, this is not financially secure. Ghanaians are still not yet buying the idea of having a bespoke fashion house where they can shop from, which is originally made in Ghana. People still have very weird ideas about that. So I don't know if this would be a safe trajectory to take. So at the time when she decided to quit biochemistry and go into fashion, it wasn't very popular. It wasn't a choice that a lot of people supported. And to hear how she was able to still put biochem aside and forge on with fashion. And today she's one of the most renowned fashion designers, and she owns one of the more popular fashion houses in Ghana. Those are some of the decisions that we women have to make all the time, which is more difficult for us because we are always told to take into consideration raising families and pursuing careers that are challenging sometimes or unconventional sometimes. And we always need to kind of prove ourselves that it is possible, that if our male counterparts can do it, we can do it too. And so this is what the Great Podcast is about. And this is what I want to do by starting my podcast, to change our narrative, to let people in on who we are as African women and what our struggles are daily, and what perceptions we want to change and how we want to be seen. I mean, no one person is really shaped by one single story. We are all shaped by different experiences that we have. And it's okay that sometimes we don't get it. It's okay if the perception isn't always clear cut. It's okay if we aren't always likable or subservient or quiet or unapologetic about the things that we want to do. It's all right. And the Great Podcast is supposed to create that space for us to dispel those stereotypes about women in Ghana being demure and quiet and being yes people, always accepting and not giving back, or not being able to stand up for ourselves and choose our paths the same way. So it's been a wonderful experience so far being a podcaster. There's so much that we learned from the last season, the first season that we've done, in terms of ways to record, in terms of the stories we want to tell, and the way we want to connect with people. The experience that we've had tells us that there are still a lot of women who want to talk, who have things to say, who want to share truths that aren't always popular. And it is necessary that we keep talking about identity, career, marriage, lifestyle, health matters in a largely, conservative society where this isn't. People would rather not. People would simply rather not hear us. And we're hoping that we can explore new terrains and ultimately get to a point where we are able to grow our brand, monetize it, and use the funds that we are able to get access to help women, because we're not trying to speak to just educated women or women who are more open-minded. We want to speak to the market women. We want to speak to women who do menial jobs, the women who are in rural areas who do not have accesses like those in the capitals do. There are many issues to tackle. There's still female genital mutilation all here happening in 2017 in Ghana, and a lot of girls are being subjected to this. There are girls who move up from up north Ghana down to the capital and are raped and are exposed to sexual harassment because they have nowhere to stay, they have no place to be, and these girls, we call them kayayi. Kayayi is a word for girls who work in the market, who help people who come shop with their goods and foodstuffs and things like that. And these girls sleep outside. And I remember I used to work at a radio station, and right outside the radio station, there used to be about 4 or 5 of these same girls who slept outside. And so whether the rain fell, whether there was sun, there was too much wind, whatever was happening with the climate, these girls were outside. We are children. And so there are legitimately difficult issues and potentially dangerous issues women are facing here every day. And these are the things we want to talk about. The Great Podcast plans to have documentaries done, features done, to speak on very uncomfortable issues, the sexual abuse, revenge porn. And these are topics that are relevant to us right now because it's actually happening. And when it does, the feedback and the kinds of things people say is crippling to these women. Any woman who's been a victim of sexual harassment or rape around these parts, your life literally cannot move. You cannot move on past that. You just kind of fade away because people judge you wherever you go. Your family can cut you off. If you are married, you can forget about it. I mean, and these women are always left to somehow survive on their own. And these are the stories we want to tell. We want people to know what it's like to walk in a woman's shoe every day. We want people who are listening to our podcast to hear what it's like stepping out every single day and knowing that you're in danger of being abused, you're in danger of being hurt, you're being held or being held against your will. And these are stories that are happening every day. And these are the stories we want to tell. And I will say that it's going to be challenging, and we know it's going to be challenging because on the whole, we are a very conservative group of people. Ghanaians, I would say, there are so many things we'd rather not talk about. I mean, there are young girls who live with uncles and are raped and cannot speak about it because when they do, they're told to hush, they're told to keep quiet. They're told that they're bringing disgrace to their fathers or uncles or brothers, and these are the kinds of horrors they live with, and they cannot talk about these things freely. And we can only imagine how damaging this is to women who have to go through this. And so this is the platform that we feel, first of all, that's the wonderful thing about podcasting. If you decide to do audio podcasting, people do not need to see who these people are. People do not need to put a face to the voices. They just need to know the story, which is the essence of podcasting. Know the story, listen to the story, relate to the story, and understand it. Understand the impact it will have and it has on your mindset and how it changes it. And so this is where we are trying to get to. This is what we are trying to do with the Great Podcast. And like I said, so far it's been an amazing journey. The feedback we've gotten is wonderful because the audience for podcasting here is still developing. It's still new. It's still fresh for a lot of people. Largely, for the longest time, podcasts that were available were mostly religious podcasts, but going into different areas of content is still something that's fairly new. And so we're still talking to a developing audience. We're talking to people who didn't even know podcasting existed and didn't know that it could be done in these parts. And so it's a great time. We feel like this is good timing for us, and we're hoping to grow. We're hoping to nurture what we're doing and be better at it. In a few months, we'll be starting our next season, and we're hoping to tell more and more of these stories. I'm looking forward to certain particular stories that, like I said, are uncomfortable to listen to, but are necessary for our generation especially. Because what we've realized is, for the past 25 years, we've harped a lot, and we've done a lot for the girl child education. If you could believe it, this was actually a problem. Education for women in Ghana was still a challenge about 25 years ago. And we had to keep talking. There had to be people pushing for policies that enabled that girls could go to school free, or there were more incentives for girls to go to school free, because there were actually families, Ghanaian families, that felt like children, young girls, needed to be in the kitchen, needed to be at home, needed to be raised domestically, to be wives and mothers. And so we've actually come a long way educating girls to be much more than we've always thought they could be. And so we've done a lot. There's been a lot of work done in terms of raising girls to be much more, to follow career paths that were not before open to us. But in doing that also, we've realized that we've neglected the education of young men, because I guess people have felt like it was a given that boys would automatically do better in school. And so we haven't paid attention to the life skills of grooming young men who can meet the needs of modern day women today, modern Ghanaian women today. And so we realized that in many ways, no disrespect intended, but a lot of young women are thinking further. They're way ahead in terms of how they're dealing with issues today. They're more open to certain conversations, and we realize that our male counterparts are not with us. And this is not because they do not have the capacity to engage in such conversations, but it just seems they've been left behind. And so we find that there's a lot of conversation, especially in our online spaces, and we realize that a lot of young men simply cannot relate, simply do not know better, still have very backward, archaic mindsets in terms of the capabilities of women, even now in 2017. And it's sad. It's sad to see, because I mean, bottom line, women and men need each other, but we also need to understand where we are both coming from. We need to understand our individuality, our makeup as men and women, and explore the capabilities that we have. But if we are doing that and we find that that it's just us, that we're doing this on our own, and our male counterparts do not understand our growth in terms of decisions that we made, in terms of demanding better pay for for the work we are doing, understand that we are free to make choices regarding our reproductive health that should have no bearing on whether there's a man around or there's no man around. To be able to make choices in our careers, to be able to choose that over wanting marriage or motherhood in certain situations, for them to be able to understand that we need to bring our little boys up to speed. We need to groom them and let them know that women are able to achieve so much more, and it is in no way a threat to what our young men can do. And it's challenging, because in our online spaces in Ghana, you'd be surprised the kinds of conversations we are still having to have, deciding on what roles people play in marriages, what roles people play as mothers, as women in our society, how women should address certain issues, how women should speak, how women should communicate. They should be demure, they should be likable, they should be more concerned about looking presentable, much more than in their capabilities. These are the kind of conversations we are still having in 2017. And so yeah, we want to dispel all of that. And for me, it starts with the great podcast, and I think it's my little contribution to making better a situation that has affected us negatively for so long. So I'm looking forward. It's an exciting time for us. It's an exciting time to be podcasting in Ghana. And I'm hoping that there will be more. I'm hoping that there will be more. I'm hoping it becomes so full in terms of content, in terms of variety, in terms of having listening options, so many listening options, and people will pick up on this. And it will not only change our lifestyle, it will also allow us to have these relevant and important conversations now, more so than ever. And hopefully we can grow from that. We can have a forward-thinking country full of capable and fearless women who are making decisions for themselves independently, without being subjected to scrutiny by other women or men who feel a woman's place should be there or here or whatever. And this is what the Great Podcast is about. So I think this is it from me. I hope I've been able to share something that was impactful to International Day Podcast, like I said earlier.
Absolutely amazing story.
Absolutely amazing story.
KY. And it's you're providing a perspective that I think needs to be shared. You know, you're covering those stories that people are not willing to talk about, that they're not willing to face, in a country, in a mindset, in a region that has been so set in its ways for so long. And you highlighting those controversies and those topics is incredible. I mean, when I hear you say that I'm only 4 or 5 episodes into your podcast, and you're already thinking about going and doing documentaries and, you know, and pushing the envelope and getting these stories out there, I think it's amazing. I think the thing that you bring up that is so crucial for podcasting is that you can share the stories of those women that have been impacted. They can share their story and remain anonymous, like you said, because there are so many consequences for them speaking out. And I think that's one of the the amazing assets that you and podcasts like yourself can actually really bring to the table.
Exactly. And it's important that there are events like these where we get to share um, our experiences on this path, podcasting, because it's not only just to bring out issues that are difficult in an entrenched society, but it's also to share the strides that we've made over the last couple of years and how far we're getting and how open-minded we are to change. And we don't get to do that often. And it's only on platforms like these that we get to share stories from all over. And so it's an exciting time, like I'm saying, and I'm looking forward to telling even more difficult stories and pushing people to think about them and what we can do collectively to change perceptions and notions. And that's really why we started the Great Podcast.
Yeah, I think every person that you interview, every person that listens and downloads to a single episode, those are incremental changes that you're making. And when you're interviewing a guest, when you're interviewing somebody that's been impacted by the things you were mentioning, it's those small incremental elements that are eventually going to build up to a movement. And using the media of podcasts to make that happen in a growing region in which, you know, there is a message that needs to be shared. There's people that want to get out there and listen and be a part of that conversation. Every episode, every minute, every hour, every person that you record is moving that dial towards the more progressive side, so that these issues are talked about and they're debated and they're hashed out. And I think people, like you said, avoid the difficult conversations, but it's at that point where podcasts allow that conversation to at least begin, even if it's in our ears. But it spurs conversation, it spurs debate, it spurs thought. And I think the Great Podcast is a great example of that. And thank you for sharing everything. Nope, I think you're muted. Go ahead, unmute your mic. There you are.
Say that again.
Yeah, I was just
I
gonna
didn't
let
hear
you.
the last.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to thank you for joining the International Podcast Day event this year. You've added tremendous value, and thank you for the kind words that events like these can bring highlights. I'm glad we've connected with you. I actually found your podcast through pod-africa.com, checked it out, listened. I was like, KY has such a great message to share. I need to have her on. So thank you for taking part of the event. Let everybody know where they can get in contact you. Is it best at your website? Where can people go to find your work?
We're on iTunes at the Great Podcast. We're also on SoundCloud, but the website I hosted on my blog. So the blog is www.sometimeskywrites / the Great Podcast. So you can find that on the link. And I think even if you check the speaker schedule, there's a link that takes you to our website that can tell you more about what we're doing. So people can follow, and you can also find me on Twitter, Miss Nyantakyi, which is my surname, and on Facebook as well. The Great Podcast is on Facebook as well. You can find that on Twitter as well at the Great Podcast HQ. So yeah, those are the links you can find us at. And let's engage. We want to hear from people. We want people to listen and give us all the feedback we can get, because we're very new and I would say inexperienced. And so we're more than willing, more eager to listen and learn from other experienced podcasters in our production.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking part in our event. I'm glad we've connected. Thank you for sharing a message that I don't think anybody else could have shared on this International Podcast Day. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, continue to celebrate our day, the power of podcasts. Continue to use hashtag International Podcast Day to be involved. Again, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Blueberry, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, and Potable. Thank you, guys. Continue to have a great day, and happy International Podcast Day.
Thank you.